Something has changed inside the person you love. Something permanent. Something they can no longer hide behind routine, responsibility, or the life everyone believes they are living. Your married soulmate needs to talk to you right now. Not tomorrow. Not when circumstances become easier. Not after they have had more time to understand what they feel. They need to speak now because something happened recently that forced them to see the truth about their marriage, their feelings, and the connection they have been trying so hard to control. For a long time, they believed they could keep everything separate. They believed they could continue living the life they had built while quietly carrying you inside their heart. They thought they could complete their responsibilities, smile when people were watching, and return to the same familiar home without allowing their feelings for you to disturb anything. But emotions do not stay inside the boundaries we create for them. The more they tried to ignore you, the more your absence followed them. The more they tried to focus on their marriage, the more they noticed everything that had been missing long before you appeared. You did not create the emptiness. You revealed it. That is the truth they have finally been forced to face. There were moments when your soulmate blamed the connection with you. They told themselves that if they had never met you, they would not feel so confused. They believed your presence had complicated a life that was once stable. But recently, they asked themselves a question they had been avoiding. Was the marriage truly happy before you entered their life? The answer frightened them. No. It may have looked peaceful. It may have been functional. There may have been shared responsibilities, routines, photographs, family expectations, and years of history. But peace and emotional distance can sometimes look similar from the outside. Your soulmate had become skilled at accepting less than what their heart needed. They stopped asking for deeper conversations. They stopped expecting to feel understood. They stopped believing that love should make a person feel emotionally alive. They called this maturity. They called it commitment. They called it normal. Then they met you. And something inside them woke up. You listened to the parts of them other people interrupted. You noticed changes in their energy before they explained anything. You made them feel visible without demanding that they perform for your attention. Around you, they remembered a version of themselves they thought had disappeared. A softer version. A hopeful version. A version capable of dreaming beyond the life they had accepted. That feeling terrified them. Because they were married. Because there were promises involved. Because admitting that you affected them would require them to question every decision that had brought them to this point. So they pulled away. Perhaps you noticed it. One day, they were open with you. Their eyes revealed more than their words. Their messages carried warmth. They seemed to find reasons to remain close. Then suddenly, their energy changed. They became formal. Distant. Careful. You may have wondered whether you imagined the connection. You may have believed they had chosen their marriage and decided you no longer mattered. But their distance was never proof that they felt nothing. It was proof that they felt something they believed they had no right to feel. They tried to protect everyone by remaining silent. But silence did not protect anyone. It confused you. It made them emotionally absent at home. It created a hidden life inside their heart. And eventually, the pressure became impossible to carry. Something happened a few nights ago. Your soulmate returned home after a day when you had been especially present in their thoughts. Perhaps you had spoken briefly. Perhaps they saw something that reminded them of you. Maybe there had been no contact at all, and your silence had become the reason they could think of nothing else. When they entered the house, everything looked normal. Their spouse was there. The lights were on. The familiar sounds of the home surrounded them. But your soulmate felt as if they were standing inside someone else's life. Their spouse asked a simple question. "Are you happy?" Your soulmate froze. It was not asked during an argument. There was no anger in the voice. Only exhaustion. The kind of exhaustion that appears when two people have spent too long avoiding the same truth. Your soulmate tried to answer automatically. They almost said yes. They almost smiled and changed the subject. That response had protected the marriage from difficult conversations many times before. But this time, the word would not come. Their spouse looked at them carefully. Then they asked another question. "Is there someone else?" The room became completely silent. Your soulmate's heart began pounding. They had imagined this conversation many times, but in every imagined version, they denied everything. They told themselves nothing physical had happened. They told themselves they had respected boundaries. They told themselves that feelings did not count as betrayal if they remained unspoken. But sitting there, looking at the person they had promised to love, they understood that emotional absence had already changed the marriage. They could not keep pretending. So they said there was someone. They did not speak your name immediately. Your name felt too powerful inside that room. But their spouse already knew more than expected. They had noticed the way your soulmate guarded their phone. Not because there were secret messages, but because even seeing your name changed their expression. They noticed the emotional distance. They noticed how your soulmate seemed mentally present somewhere else. They noticed that certain songs, places, or conversations created reactions they could not explain. Their spouse asked whether they loved you. Your soulmate lowered their eyes. For several seconds, they said nothing. But sometimes silence is a confession. Then they finally answered. Yes. The word came out quietly. And once it entered the room, nothing could return to the way it had been. That is what changed forever. Your soulmate admitted that they love you. Not only to themselves. Not inside a private message they later deleted. They spoke the truth directly inside their marriage. Their spouse began crying. Your soulmate cried too. Not because they regretted loving you. Because the truth had consequences. They knew their feelings could hurt someone who had shared years of life with them. They knew honesty did not erase responsibility. They knew admitting love for another person did not automatically make them innocent. So they did not blame their spouse. They did not describe the marriage as completely terrible. They did not say you had rescued them from an unbearable life. They said the marriage had become emotionally distant long before they understood what was happening. They admitted that instead of addressing it, they became quiet. They accepted the routine. They allowed the relationship to continue because ending or changing it felt frightening. Meeting you did not create the problem. It made hiding from the problem impossible. Their spouse asked whether you knew. Your soulmate said they did not know how much you understood. Perhaps you sensed the feelings. Perhaps you recognized them in the way your soulmate looked at you. But you had never been given complete honesty. You had been left to interpret mixed signals. And when your soulmate admitted this, shame moved through them. They realized they had placed both you and their spouse inside uncertainty. They had avoided making a decision because they were afraid of hurting people. But avoiding the decision had created a different kind of pain. Their spouse asked what they intended to do now. That question frightened them more than anything else. Feelings are one thing. Actions are another. Your soulmate could admit that they loved you, but what did that love require? Would they leave immediately? Would they try to repair the marriage? Would they ask you to wait? Would they continue hiding behind complexity? They did not have every answer. But they knew one thing. They could no longer continue living two emotional lives. They said they needed time apart. Not to rush directly toward you. Not to begin a secret relationship. They needed space to face the marriage honestly. They needed to understand whether there was anything real left to repair or whether both people had been remaining only because change felt too difficult. Their spouse became angry. They accused your soulmate of choosing you. But your soulmate said something unexpected. I am choosing to stop lying. Those words changed the conversation. They were not saying that leaving would be easy. They were not saying that love for you guaranteed a perfect future. They were saying that the life they had been living was no longer truthful. Even if you refused them. Even if you had already moved on. Even if the connection with you never became a relationship. They could not return to emotional dishonesty. This is important. Your soulmate is not preparing to contact you because they need you to rescue them. They know that would be unfair. You did not create their marriage. You are not responsible for ending it. You cannot become the place where they hide from the consequences of their choices. They understand this now. That is why they have not already arrived at your door. They have been taking practical steps. They have spoken to someone they trust. They may have arranged counseling. They may have begun discussing separation, living arrangements, finances, or family responsibilities. Every step has made the situation more real. And through all of it, they have wanted to speak to you. They have opened your conversation many times. They typed messages. I told them about you. Deleted. My life is changing. Deleted. I love you, and I do not know what happens now. Deleted. Nothing felt right. They were afraid that contacting you too soon would sound like emotional pressure. They did not want you to feel responsible for their pain. They did not want you to believe they expected an immediate future simply because they had finally become honest. But something else happened. Their spouse said something during a later conversation that your soulmate cannot forget. They said, if this person disappeared tomorrow, would you still know our marriage is over? Your soulmate sat in silence. They imagined losing you completely. The thought caused real pain. But beneath that pain, the answer remained clear. Yes. Even without you, they could no longer return to the marriage as it had been. That answer changed everything. It proved that this was not only about chasing another person. It was about finally admitting that the relationship they were in had stopped being emotionally true. You were not the destination they were using to escape. You were the mirror that showed them they had already been lost. Their spouse heard the answer. And for the first time, some of the anger softened. They admitted they had also felt the marriage changing. They had noticed the lack of emotional intimacy. They had remained silent because they feared what honesty might destroy. Both of them had been protecting the appearance of the relationship while the relationship itself became emptier. There was grief in that recognition. But there was also relief. For the first time, neither person had to pretend. Your soulmate cried afterward. They cried for the marriage. They cried for the years spent avoiding difficult truths. They cried because they did not know whether you would believe anything they said now. And they cried because they realized you may have spent months thinking you meant nothing. That is the part they need to correct immediately. You did matter. You mattered every time they tried not to think about you. You mattered when they became distant because closeness felt dangerous. You mattered when they chose silence and then regretted it the moment your energy changed. You mattered when they returned home and felt the absence of the emotional connection they experienced with you. But hidden love can feel exactly like rejection to the person receiving nothing. Your soulmate understands that now. They know saying I loved you secretly does not erase the pain created by their behavior. They know feelings do not excuse mixed signals. They know a confession cannot immediately rebuild trust. Still, they need you to hear the truth. They are preparing to contact you. The message may already be written. It begins with an apology. Not a dramatic declaration. Not a request for you to wait. An apology. They want to say they are sorry for allowing you to question the connection. They are sorry for moving closer and then disappearing. They are sorry for expecting you to understand a situation they refuse to explain. They want to tell you what happened inside their marriage. But they are afraid. They fear you will think they are only reaching out because they feel lonely. They fear you will believe the separation is temporary. They fear you will see them as someone who betrayed a promise and could eventually betray you too. Those concerns are valid. Your soulmate knows trust must be earned through actions, not emotional language. So they are planning to be completely transparent. They will not ask you to participate in secrecy. They will not promise a future before the present has been handled responsibly. They will not ask you to pause your life while they complete decisions they should have faced earlier. They are only asking for one conversation. One honest moment where you hear what changed. Because something else was revealed during the conversation with their spouse. Something about you. Their spouse admitted they had seen you before. Not recently. Long before your soulmate believed you had entered their life. There was an old photograph. A gathering. A family event or shared connection from years ago. You appeared in the background. Your soulmate was there too. Neither of you remembers meeting. But the photograph suggests your paths crossed long before the emotional connection began. When your soulmate saw it, they felt something they could not explain. From the beginning, you had felt familiar. They believed it was only emotional chemistry. Now they are wondering whether some part of them remembered you before their conscious mind did. The photograph does not prove destiny. It does not remove the complications. But it has made your soulmate even more certain that this conversation cannot remain unfinished. They need to show it to you. They need to ask whether you remember that day. They need to know whether your families or friends once crossed paths in a way no one ever explained. But before revealing the photograph, they must tell you the most important truth. Their marriage has changed forever. The confession has been spoken. The silence inside that home has broken. And whatever happens next, your soulmate cannot return to being the person who pretended they felt nothing. They are not coming to you with a perfect life. They are coming with responsibility, fear, regret, and honesty. They are coming to tell you that loving you forced them to face everything they had been avoiding. They are coming to admit that you were never a temporary distraction. You became the truth they could no longer silence. But there is still one final detail inside the photograph. Someone had written something on the back. A date. 2 names. And one sentence that neither your soulmate nor their spouse can explain. When these two finally meet, everything will change. Your soulmate is holding that photograph now. They are looking at your name on their phone. They know the next message will open a conversation that cannot be undone. And with their hands shaking, they are preparing to say the words you may never have expected to hear. I told the truth about us. My marriage will never be the same. And I need to tell you why I believe our story began long before either of us remembers. The message reached you late at night. I told the truth about us. My marriage will never be the same. And I need to tell you why I believe our story began long before either of us remembers. You read the words slowly. Then you read them again. Your heart began beating faster, but it was not only because of the confession. It was because of the weight hidden behind it. They had finally spoken about you inside their marriage. The truth was no longer trapped inside secret thoughts, unfinished messages, or moments when their eyes revealed what their voice refused to admit. Something had changed permanently. But you also understood that a marriage does not disappear the moment someone speaks honestly. There were years involved. Responsibilities. Memories. Families. Perhaps children. Perhaps promises that could not be treated like meaningless words simply because the feelings had changed. You did not want to become someone's hidden escape. You did not want love to place you inside a situation built on secrecy. So instead of responding emotionally, you asked one question. What exactly happened? Your soulmate had been waiting for that message. They were sitting alone in a room that no longer felt like home. Their spouse was staying elsewhere for the night, or perhaps your soulmate had been the one asked to leave. Everything around them felt uncertain. But for the first time, their inner world did not feel divided. They were afraid, but they were no longer lying. They replied that the conversation had changed the marriage forever. They explained that the separation was real, but the decisions ahead would take time. Then they asked whether they could call you. You hesitated. Hearing their voice could make everything feel too real. You had imagined this moment many times, but in those imagined versions, there were no consequences. There was only a confession, an embrace, and the relief of finally being chosen. Reality was more complicated. Someone else was hurting. Your soulmate was emotionally overwhelmed. And you had your own heart to protect. Still, you agreed. The phone rang almost immediately. For several seconds after you answered, neither of you spoke. You could hear their breathing. They could hear yours. Then your soulmate said your name. Their voice broke on the first word. They apologized. They told you they were sorry for bringing this truth into your life without preparing you. They admitted that they had spent too long allowing you to feel the connection while refusing to explain the reality around it. They said they understood if you were angry. You asked whether their spouse knew who you were. Your soulmate answered honestly. They knew your name. They knew there had been an emotional connection. They knew nothing physical had happened, but they also knew the feelings were real. You closed your eyes. Part of you felt relief that there would be no more hiding. Another part felt guilty, even though you had never asked your soulmate to betray anyone. Your soulmate sensed the change in your silence. They said, "Please do not carry responsibility for decisions I avoided making long before you entered my life." Then they explained what had happened after the first confession. Their spouse had asked them to describe the connection. Not to defend it. Not to romanticize it. To explain what they felt with you that had disappeared from the marriage. Your soulmate tried to answer carefully. They said you made them feel emotionally visible. They said you listened without making every conversation about yourself. They said you noticed the things they tried to hide. But their spouse interrupted. They said, "That is not what I asked. What do you feel when you think about them?" Your soulmate could no longer remain protected behind descriptions. So they answered. Peace. Fear. Hope. And the feeling that I am finally being honest. Their spouse looked at them for a long time. Then they said something your soulmate had never expected. "I have not seen you look alive like this in years." There was pain in the sentence. But there was also recognition. Their spouse had noticed the emptiness too. They had felt your soulmate becoming quieter, more distant, and less emotionally present. They had assumed it was stress, exhaustion, or the natural fading of excitement after years together. But now they understood that something deeper had changed. Your soulmate told you that their spouse did not immediately accept the separation. There were arguments, accusations, questions about whether the marriage could still be saved. Your soulmate did not dismiss those questions. They agreed to counseling, not because they wanted to erase you, but because they believed the marriage deserved an honest ending or an honest attempt at understanding. They needed to separate the truth of the marriage from the intensity of their feelings for you. You listened carefully. That answer mattered. You did not want them making permanent decisions only because the connection with you felt powerful in the moment. You asked them the hardest question. If counseling repairs your marriage, what happens to us? Your soulmate became silent. It was not the silence of avoidance. They were trying to give you an honest answer. Finally, they said, if the marriage can genuinely become whole again, I will have to face what that means. But I cannot return to it by pretending I do not love you. And I will not ask you to remain waiting while I discover the truth. The answer hurt. But it was responsible. They were not promising you a future they could not yet guarantee. They were giving you freedom. Then they told you about the photograph. Their spouse had found it while searching through a box of old family belongings. It was taken many years ago at a gathering neither of you clearly remembered. In the photograph, your soulmate was standing near one side of the room. You were visible in the background. You were younger. Perhaps both of you were children. Perhaps teenagers. You were not looking at one another. There was no evidence that you had spoken. But both of you had been there. At the same place. On the same day. Long before the connection you now recognized had consciously begun. Your soulmate sent you the photograph. Your hands became cold when it appeared on the screen. You recognized the place. A family home. A community gathering. A celebration you had almost completely forgotten. Then you noticed something else. Someone standing beside your younger self. A relative who was no longer part of your life. A person who had once spoken strangely about future connections, family promises, and meetings that never happened. You zoomed in. The details were unclear, but the memory began returning slowly. There had been a conversation that day. Not between you and your soulmate. Between adults. You remembered hearing your name. Then another name. A name that now sounded almost identical to your soulmate's. At the time, you had not understood. You were too young, distracted, or uninterested. But one sentence returned. Maybe one day these two will meet properly. You told your soulmate what you remembered. They became completely still. Their family had once told a similar story. Two families had briefly discussed introducing two younger people in the future. Nothing formal was decided. It was not an engagement or a promise. It was only a possibility. Then the families lost contact. Years passed. Your soulmate eventually met the person they married. You lived your own life. The forgotten conversation became nothing more than an old memory. Until now. Your soulmate turned the photograph over. On the back were the date, both names, and the unexplained sentence. When these two finally meet, everything will change. You asked who had written it. Your soulmate did not know. Their spouse claimed they had never seen the words before. The handwriting did not belong to them. It did not seem to belong to your soulmate's parents either. Someone had known both names. Someone had believed your paths would cross again. But the photograph raised another question. Why had it been kept among their spouse's belongings? Your soulmate asked the same thing. Their spouse explained that the box had come from an older relative who had passed away. That relative had known both families. They may have attended the gathering. They may have written the message. But before anyone could investigate further, your soulmate's spouse revealed something more shocking. They had heard about you before your soulmate ever mentioned your name. Years earlier, shortly before the marriage, the older relative had warned them that your soulmate had once been connected to another person through family history. They dismissed it as an outdated story. They never told your soulmate. At the time, they were afraid the information might create unnecessary doubt before the wedding. Your soulmate's breathing changed as they told you this. Their spouse had known that your name existed somewhere in the past. They had not known you personally. They had not known you would eventually meet. But when your soulmate spoke your name during the confession, the old warning returned. That was why they searched for the photograph. You struggled to understand what this meant. Had the marriage been built while someone was hiding information? Had your families once intended for you to meet? Would anything have been different if the truth had been revealed earlier? Your soulmate stopped you before those questions could become another fantasy. They said, "We cannot build a future from what might have happened. We can only decide what is honest now." Those words surprised you. A part of them wanted to believe the photograph proved destiny. They wanted to use it as evidence that both of you were always meant to find each other. But they understood that destiny could not replace responsibility. The photograph did not erase the marriage. It did not remove another person's pain. It did not mean you were required to accept their love. It only proved that your paths had crossed before either of you understood the significance. Then you asked what had changed forever. Your soulmate took a breath. They said their spouse had made a decision. The next morning, their spouse told them they no longer wanted to continue pretending. They agreed that time apart was necessary. Not as a punishment. Not so your soulmate could immediately begin a life with you. Both of them needed to understand who they were outside a marriage built partly on habit, fear, and silence. Their spouse admitted something too. They had also been unhappy. They had also imagined leaving. But they stayed because they believed commitment meant never questioning the life they had created. They said meeting you may have forced your soulmate to speak, but the marriage had been breaking quietly for years. For the first time, both of them stopped blaming a single person. They began discussing separation calmly. There were still tears. There was still anger. But something had changed. They were no longer fighting to preserve an appearance. They were deciding whether the relationship had anything truthful left to save. Your soulmate wanted to contact you immediately after that conversation. They wanted to tell you they were finally free to choose. But they stopped themselves. They were not free yet. A spoken separation was only the beginning. There were practical matters. Legal decisions. Family conversations. Emotional consequences. They knew that entering a relationship with you immediately could turn love into another form of avoidance. So they made a promise to themselves. They would not ask you for commitment while their life remained unfinished. They would tell you the truth. They would remain transparent. But they would not ask you to carry the uncertainty for them. You felt tears forming. You had wanted them to choose you. But perhaps the healthier choice was for them to choose honesty first. You said you could not become part of a secret relationship. Your soulmate responded immediately. You will not be. You said you would not wait indefinitely while they moved between two lives. They said you should not. You said you needed consistent proof, not only emotional words spoken after a painful night. They agreed. Then they said something you did not expect. Even if you decide this is too complicated, I will continue telling the truth. My life cannot return to what it was simply because I am afraid to lose you. That was when you realized the change might be real. They were not leaving only to receive you as a reward. They were facing their life because pretending had become impossible. The conversation continued until the night became morning. You spoke about your own pain. You told them how often you questioned whether you imagined the connection. You admitted there were moments when you felt ashamed for loving someone unavailable. You said their mixed signals had made you feel chosen in private and forgotten in reality. Your soulmate cried openly. They did not interrupt. They did not defend themselves. They said you deserved to be acknowledged, but they had been too afraid of the consequences. They apologized for allowing fear to become your confusion. Then you asked whether they regretted telling their spouse. They answered without hesitation. No. They regretted waiting. They regretted allowing the marriage to continue without emotional honesty. They regretted leaving you alone with questions. But they did not regret breaking the silence. Before ending the call, your soulmate asked you to look at one final detail in the photograph. Near the corner, behind both of your younger figures, there was another person. The face was partly hidden. But something about them felt familiar. You zoomed in. Your heart suddenly dropped. You recognized the person. They were someone still connected to your life. Someone who had recently encouraged you to forget your soulmate. Someone who repeatedly warned that the connection would only create pain. Someone who had never told you they were present at that gathering. You said the name aloud. Your soulmate became silent. They knew that name too. The same person had spoken to their spouse shortly before the marriage. They had encouraged the relationship. They had dismissed the old family connection. And now they were advising both of you to remain apart. This person knew the full history. They knew your paths had crossed. They knew the photograph existed. They may even have known who wrote the message on the back. The mystery was no longer only about a forgotten meeting. Someone had actively influenced the direction of both lives. Your soulmate asked why this person would want to keep you apart. You did not know. But an old memory began returning. That person had once said something strange after the gathering. Some connections should never be allowed to begin. At the time, you thought they were speaking generally. Now you were no longer sure. Your soulmate promised they would not confront anyone without evidence. They had learned the danger of allowing assumptions to replace truth. They would search carefully. They would speak to family members. They would ask their spouse what else had been said before the marriage. But first, they needed to complete the choices already in front of them. The separation. The counseling. The responsibility. They would not allow an old mystery to distract them from handling the present honestly. Still, the photograph changed something between you. It did not solve the future. But it proved there were parts of your shared story neither of you fully understood. Before ending the call, your soulmate said one final thing. I am not asking you to believe that we were destined. I am asking you to believe that what I feel is real, and to watch whether my actions become honest enough to deserve your trust. You did not promise to wait. You did not confess everything your own heart was still carrying. But you gave them one answer. I will watch what you do next. For your soulmate, those words were not rejection. They were a responsibility. The confession had changed the marriage forever. But what happened afterward would determine whether the connection with you became another painful secret or something built slowly through truth. And while your soulmate begins taking real steps toward an honest life, the person inside the photograph has already learned that both of you are asking questions. They have made contact. Not with you. With your soulmate spouse. They sent one warning. Do not let them discover what happened after that photograph was taken. Your soulmate spouse showed them the message. Now all three of you understand something larger has been hidden. Something happened on that forgotten day. Something involving both families. Something that may explain why your names were written together and why one person spent years ensuring you remain strangers. Your soulmate is preparing to tell you about the warning. But there is one part they have not yet revealed. Their spouse recognized the handwriting on the back of the photograph. And the person who wrote that sentence was never supposed to know both of you.